my portfolio. Pimp my portfolio.
This is a segment where we get a community member to submit their portfolio for one of our experts to review and provide some ideas on how they can improve it. And in the studio today, we have Matt Ingram. Matt, welcome.
Thank you.
And on the line, we have Vanessa. Vanessa, welcome to Equity Mates.
Hi, guys. Good to be here.
Thank you for submitting. We're looking forward to this one. So as always, Ren, why don't you take us through Vanessa's portfolio?
All right. So Vanessa has 10 holdings in her portfolio. We'll start with 3 ETFs that make up 44% of the total holdings. So we've got VHY, Vanguard Australian Shares High Yield ETF. That's 19%. Then we've got Vanguard MSCI International Shares ETF, about 13%. And then iShares S&P 500, about 12%. A number of individual stocks, 6 in total: NVIDIA, Alphabet, Macmillan Shakespeare, Origin Energy, Rio Tinto, and Yancoal Australia. Then finally, the final position, a small holding, the VanEck Bitcoin ETF. Interested to hear what Matt thinks about that one. So Vanessa, before we get you to explain the portfolio, we like to get our expert to give the portfolio a nickname or to characterize it in some ways. So Matt, over to you.
I don't know if this is going to make much sense, but I saw Shakespeare. And I've also seen there's the VHY, high dividend yield. That I've called this one to pay or not to pay. That is the question.
Yes, nice.
Nice. Well, Vanessa, why don't you take us through how this portfolio has come to be over your investing journey?
Okay, so I started in 2022, like early, so it's quite a recent portfolio. And I bought 3 stocks, which was ANZ at the time, VHY, the ETF, and IVV. So just a third each. And then I just didn't really touch it until last year, where I bought my property. So I had some leftover money, like a bit of money to invest. And at the time, I was very interested in debt recycling. So I decided to buy a bunch of them with dividends, so I could then use the debt recycling. And from there, I just bought some extra stocks as well.
Nice.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How have you gone about buying the individual stocks? What's been your thought process?
So just looking at the highest dividends, but also the the growth in general. So finding companies that are actually growing, but also giving good dividends for the debt recycling. And then after buying 3 or 4 of them, I was like, I just need to buy NVIDIA or Google because I just can't keep buying the Australian companies. But then I discovered that NVIDIA actually has a really small dividend, so it qualifies for the debt recycling, which is great.
Nice. So, Matt, what are your initial thoughts for Vanessa's portfolio?
Yeah, a bit of context helps there. It seemed like an odd mix initially, having the VHY, which is obviously, a higher yield play mixed with things like VGS and IVV. Coming from that debt recycling approach, it makes sense. I think just more generally when considering that VHY holding though, I mean, Vanessa, I don't know much about you, what stage of life you're in or whatever it might be, and understand why you have VHY because it's that debt recycling. But just considering that, even with debt recycling, I understand the idea is trying to get income so you can pay off your non-deductible debt. But focusing a little bit more on growth over time is going to achieve the same thing. All something like VHY is doing is taking your gains essentially, rather than them being reinvested in the company, they're paying it out as income and now you're being taxed on it at that point in time, instead of just getting some growth, getting a CGT discount, paying that down, and then, if it's part of debt recycling, paying off your non-deductible debt or whatever it might be. So things like VHY are typically reserved for if you genuinely need passive income as a stream to live on. I would personally be focusing a bit more on growth, depending on what stage of life you're at, but focusing a bit more on growth rather than just high yield, because you might not be getting the growth you need out of that.
And you're saying for Vanessa, she can still do debt recycling, but it's more tax efficient to do it in a way where you prioritize growth investments rather than income investments.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful to some extent, like when you're looking at what the funds are used for that you've borrowed and the deductibility of it, and is it income producing and so forth. But most of these growth ETFs are paying a dividend anyway. So you're still getting that little bit of income, but you're getting more growth out of it, which, longer term, depending on what your marginal tax rate is, it's probably going to be more tax effective to sell that later on and clear your non-deductible debt, and probably going to be more effective longer term anyway than just trying to get some big dividends along the way.
So Vanessa, has the purpose of this portfolio been to really just use it as a debt recycling, or how have you been thinking about this longer term in terms of the growth side?
If it was just me, like if I was like following what I feel, I would just go for NVIDIA and Google and Alphabet, sorry. And
you would have done very well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when I look at the profit, like at today's date, like just NVIDIA and Google are almost doing the same profit than everything else, even more.
Yes.
So it's just the way it is. But yeah, VHY. So, Matt, are you saying I should just put everything under VGS?
No, I mean, you've got VHY there already. You've got it going. I wouldn't, you could just leave that, but I wouldn't really be, adding to it. I'm just saying there's a case for focusing just as much on growth assets as there is on income assets. Traditionally, people think about debt recycling and focus on income, not realizing that you're probably missing out on a lot of the effectiveness of it by only focusing on income. So maybe just going forward, having a bit more focus on the growth side of things, knowing that it's still going to help you accomplish that goal of debt recycling.
Now, Vanessa, before we jumped on, there are a couple of parts of the markets or asset classes that you were interested to get Matt's thoughts on. So what specifically did you want to speak through?
Yeah, I was interested in buying some gold, maybe gold miners, and also some rest of the world, like ex-US, ex-Australia.
So what are your thoughts there, Matt?
Yeah. I wish you were thinking about buying gold a year ago because it's had a cracking run.
Instead of doing debt recycling.
Yeah, I mean, with gold, if you're going to go down the path of gold miners, then I would keep it to probably a gold mining ETF. There's a few out there. VanEck have a good one, GDX. Yeah, you don't really want to, take too many bets on one particular gold miner. There's some big names out there, Newmont and so forth, that have done well. But yeah, a ETF for that. I look, gold, people thought it was getting pricey 6 months ago, and it keeps going. I think as a long-term holding in the portfolio, it's definitely worthwhile.
And do you prefer an ETF of gold miners or an ETF that has gold and tracks the price?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, it would have just been gold. As gold started to run, the gold miners were left behind, and it's sort of the way that they price things, and it takes a while for everything to flow through to them. So there was a clear opportunity 6 to 12 months ago to jump into gold miners, and we did that. So we kind of got that second wind, and then it became quite a clear case for silver. Silver often follows gold, and it was lagging, and so the case for silver sort of opened up a few months ago as well, and now that's at some highs as well. So it's really about the timing around it. But a little bit of both, why not? Bit of a gold ETF, bit of a gold miner ETF, and you're covering all bases.
And then what about, all world exposure? How would you think about that for Vanessa?
Well, I mean, there's VGS, which has some allocation to the rest of the world, but it is, I think, 70, 80% US. So if you are keen on getting more than that, there's a few ways to do it. Obviously, there's kind of the Captrol VEU kind of play, which is everything except the US. So that would complement it quite well. There is you could go a little more direct with a Europe ETF and an Asia ETF, but you're maybe unnecessarily complicating things by doing that. Or you could take a bit more of a active play. There is a couple of active ETFs that have done phenomenally well that have global funds. So can I name?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Tell us all.
Look, one that I really like at the moment, and we've met the fund manager, and he's very impressive. This is the Plato Global Alpha Fund. Now they have up to about 1,000 holdings in there, so it's a bit of an index approach, but they have short positions, right? So they protect themselves on the downside. So they've achieved something like, since inception about 4 years ago, about 24% annual return, taking that somewhat passive play, but also doing some very interesting things in there. So that's run by Dr. David Allen. They have an ETF, an active ETF that anyone can access. So that gives you that global exposure with a bit of downside protection as well.
Nice. So Vanessa, a couple of ideas to think about there. Gold miners versus just buying a gold index or ETF, I should say, and a few active managers to look at as well.
Now, Vanessa, before we wrap up, we have to ask about your Bitcoin allocation. So it's quite small. It's about 1.5% of your portfolio. So what's the thinking around Bitcoin, and why did you decide to do it as an ETF?
Yeah, I don't know. I just looked around and it's more for playing, really, like, see how it's behaving. So far, it hasn't really been wow, I have to say. So
yeah, it's been a bit vanilla this
It
year.
hasn't hit the highs that people expected it to, that's for sure.
What do you reckon, Matt? How when clients come to you and say, I want some Bitcoin in the portfolio, how are you managing that?
Yeah, just like this, just a Bitcoin ETF. I think we need to acknowledge it for what it is. I mean, it's if we're going to treat gold like, having that as an alternative holding in a portfolio, a few percent, then I don't see why we wouldn't do the same with Bitcoin. 1.3% is what this says you've got in there. That's fine. You could probably crank that up a bit. Depends who you're asking,
Okay.
I suppose. But I have no opposition to that or a slightly larger holding.
Nice.
There you go. Pump those numbers up, Vanessa.
Yes, more Bitcoin. Well, Vanessa, I think if we were to try and summarize what Matt has sort of said, it's obviously if you're pursuing the debt recycling, then some of the ETFs there, are providing an advantage, but don't do it at the sake of growth long term, because that still has some advantages as well, and might even get you in a better position later on down the track. So, but look, Nvidia, Google, two positions that I'm sure have done very well for you as well. So, so thank you for submitting today.
thank you.
We really appreciate you putting forward your portfolio, Vanessa. And if anyone else listening would like to put forward their portfolio, head to equitymates.com/contact. There's an information form there. And if you'd like to speak to Matt as well, or any of our handpicked advisors, head to equitymates.com/advice. Fill in the form and we'll put you in touch with the most appropriate advisor. But Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.